We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Byrne Power in Tbilisi, Georgia. And today what we're going to do is the second part of my 4-year anniversary in Georgia. And I'll be talking today about why I really appreciate living here. And people have asked, Byrne, why have you moved to Georgia? Which I answered in the first part. And secondly, what do you really appreciate about living in Georgia? What do you like about living there? So that's what I'm going to answer today. I'm going to answer that question in detail. Obviously, if you look, this is over an hour long, and I think you'll probably find it interesting if you're interested in other cultures at all, and particularly what's this place, Georgia, that Byrne's talking about. And before we get into it, let me remind you, you support the channel. You can support it by sharing the videos. You can support it by liking this video. That seems to help the blind idiot gods of the algorithms to spread it around. You can support it by making a comment, telling me, have you ever thought about Georgia much? What do you think? And by the way, a reminder, I am inviting people to come here in October, and I will put a link to the video where I talk about it here. This is just as the introduction to the concept. Eventually, I'm going to have a definite call for people to do it. And right now, I'm just finding out if there are people who are interested. And I think I've got enough to certainly go ahead with the official call soon. So I think it's 6 or 7, maybe 8 now. The total will be 12 or 13, I'm saying. And for more information, see that video. And you can support the channel in one of 2 ways. There is a PayPal link below, and evidently, I just discovered, thanks to the help from some of the people out here watching, that my GoFundMe page is still active because I'm going to reignite it to try to help me get my library from Alaska to here once I have the final numbers soon. I'm hoping to do that this summer. We'll see. Okay, so let's find out what in the world I get out of living in Tbilisi, Georgia, which is a place I would say the vast majority of the people watching this video have not only never been to, but never even thought about. Come along. Let's discuss the different periods of my time here in Georgia before we get into my observations. I have first arrived here to live on December 15th, 2018. And that lasted 3 months till March 15th of 2019. I lived again in the same apartment, my friend Mariam Sichinava's place in Sabertalo on Vajrapshevela Avenue. And that was kind of a repeat of my time in earlier 2018. That is to say, I lived in the same neighborhood, discovered things more in that neighborhood, but also would take the metro, which was near me, and the metro is very fast, and it would get me into the center of town, Liberty Square, Rustaveli Avenue, places like that, and or go to the Marjanishvili area. But I used that as my central hub. Also, I did a lot of walking, so I walked from Sabertalo all the way over to Vaque. I went to the Vaque Cemetery, and that was an interesting expedition, about a 45-minute walk one way. And I would take buses and just explore to the ends of some of the lines. That was a way of getting to know the street. But that was my first period in living here. That's also when I got my job working for the Tbilisi Museums Union. But that was just an introduction. Then I lived on Zaldistanishvili Street. Well, actually, Zaldistanishvili Close, they called it. So there were actually 3 or 4 Zaldistanishvilis all right around each other, which made it very complicated to get deliveries or anything else. But that was just up the hill from the Rustaveli Square statue of Shota Rustaveli. There was the Rustaveli McDonald's was down there. The Kinos Sachli, which was the cinema house and the Academy of Sciences, all right in that area. And that became my default zone for Tbilisi at that point, which was very good because it was very, very central. And I lived there up until January 1st of 2022. That period would extend from March 15th to we'll say the beginning of January of 2020, or shall we say March of 2020. That was when the lockdowns went into effect. And this was my introduction to the city, the beginning of working here, and the end of working here as well, which I've explained in other places. My exploration, taking buses to the end of places, hiking up Matatsamindo Mountain from behind my house, starting my YouTube channels. I had one in existence already, Gravity from Above, but then I started the Anadromist, and then this channel, Georgian Crossroads, and there's still one other channel which is in existence, but I haven't told many people about yet. And it was the period where I really started understanding Georgia, both in the very good ways and also in the more realistic ways where you say, oh, they do that here, those kinds of ways. So the next period, though, starts in March of 2020 and goes until February of 2022. And we'll call these the pandemic times. And in the pandemic times, we had totally empty streets. And I had friends giving me bits of footage they were taking. One friend was right above Tavasuplebis Moadani, Liberty Square, and at night, 9 o'clock at night, totally empty, dead streets. You would never imagine such a thing here at any night of the year. But then we got these images, which I'm showing to you right now. That was also the time where it was isolation. I had a couple of friends that I met with regularly. Some I saw every now and then. But that was when we thought just being isolated and wearing masks would prevent you from getting it. But in fact, as we learned, once the initial period of lockdown was over and things started to loosen up again, suddenly, I think it was out in Batumi, we started having people attending raves without masks, and before you knew it, the entire country had COVID, and you started seeing a lot more people attending funerals, and it was very serious. However, the Georgians didn't panic in all of this the way they did in other countries. During this time, there was kind of an awakening from the pandemic. It was slow. We went through 2 or 3 different phases, as many people did. But I also took a couple of really beautiful trips into the mountains by myself during this time. And it opened me to more of the beauties of the country. For me, it ended going to the Czech Republic at the end of February of 2022, and what started happening on February 24th of 2022 entered the next period for me, but also for a lot of people. And when I returned from Prague was just opening up, and the restrictions on masks were over, except in stores and such. things felt like they were loosening up there. And by the time I got back here, things felt much more open. And within a few months, the pandemic felt like a thing of the past. And it was odd going to Germany later in 2022, where they were essentially treating it as the way we were treating it 6 months before I left to go to Prague earlier in the year. They were in some sort of twilight zone at that time. One of the things that also started on January 1st of 2022, I spent my first night here in my new apartment in Vaque, which at that time, if you remember any of the videos from that, was completely empty. I had to build my shelves, buy furniture, but it was a very different sort of neighborhood. There were no more theaters here, no more art museums like there were downtown, but all the food I could possibly want was here. So essentially, this period of time for me has been a period of living in a new neighborhood and environment, but also the period of time during the Russian invasion of Ukraine and of the exile of many Russians coming over the border to escape what's going on in Putin's Russia, as well as an awakening of the cultural life again, which I find, of course, wonderful. So that's where I am right now. So I've given you that just to give you an idea of the different periods of my life here. So the first period was the end of 2018 into 2019, up to the beginning of 2020, which we can call, well, we wouldn't want to call it the old Georgia, but it was the pre-pandemic Georgia, which on one hand seemed optimistic, but on the other hand was kind of getting sluggish for reasons of politics and such that I won't go into. Then comes the pandemic, a couple of years, which is its own era, and then comes the post-pandemic but Russian invasion era. So very distinct in my mind, these periods, and the feeling of each of them is very different as well. That's been 4 years, and let me give you some of my observations since I've been here. And these are things that have affected my outlook on life, have changed my outlook on life, but also sometimes, a little cultural bumping and wondering and questioning. So the first thing, and the thing that drew me here, but it's still very important to me, is the music and dance culture. And by this, I'm not talking about any modern popular trends. I'm talking about the traditional music and dance. And when I first came here in 2016, I spent a couple of days with the Saukashvili Dance Company. And then in 2018, I discovered the Arisioni Dance Company, dance and music organization. Both of these present mythic folk presentations of Georgian culture on stages. Some of the dancing and singing is just absolutely astounding and incredible. In fact, this will give you an idea of what I find so incredible about traditional music, singing, and dance here in Georgia. I was also here. I went and visited Georgi Ushikishvili, and he has a folk school to learn folk music. And that was really fascinating to me. Some of these clips from these things that I saw have received like 100,000 views on my Gravity from Above channel. I don't have that channel monetized any more than I have this one monetized or my others because I'm living here. And in order to do AdSense off of YouTube and Google, you have to get something in the mail. And I can't get any mail here. It's just crazy. So I can't monetize this. I may figure a way around this at some point, but I haven't been able to do it yet. Then again, the Georgians younger Georgians tend to pride themselves on their electronic music and club life and such. I don't. To me, it gets pretty boring. I'm walking through, the Sabertalo City Mall, and I hear electronic music going pretty loud too. And I'm just like, why? This is just the least musical thing there is. It's just a rhythm. And it always strikes me, a lot of people here, having been separated from the main bulk of the musical developments in the West in the late 20th century, don't realize that, I heard that electronic rhythm in 1985, and that one in 1975, and that one in 1995, and there's been very little development, except in kind of odd special effects and things like that. Every now and then I have heard kind of a blend between something like jazz and electronic, which I found really fascinating, but then try to find it to buy, as a physical product. It doesn't exist here. Record stores don't exist here. I want to bring my record collection here, and I am turning it into absolutely worthless, because no one here would ever buy any of these, because I couldn't even buy a Blu-ray, DVD, CD player here. They don't exist. Nobody here has physical media anymore, which is sad. I do, because I believe that that's important, but that's another issue. But that was also something, there are some Georgian pop music, or performers who make Georgian pop music, and it has the same problems that pop music does all over the world. The slick production, the kind of chordal arrangements are just way too broad. They don't fit the music. And sometimes it's just the same thing, and it's just boring. And I hate to say it, but that's not why I came. I didn't come for the pop music. I didn't come for the electronic music. I came because of the music and dance in a traditional mode. Also, though, I have discovered the ballet culture here, which is really fascinating, whether it's the more traditional Russian-type classic ballet that you'll find at the Palais Opera Theater. I have really good friends in the Georgi Alexidze ballet troupe, and what they do is modern, but it's not... It has a lot of content to it. It's not empty. It's not simply gestures, but there's really ideas and such. And when I go, particularly there's one called Beatrice, Dante's muse. And you go to that, and it's her trip to hell before Dante's, and her trip to heaven and hell. It's just an absolutely amazing piece. So and it doesn't cost much to go to the ballet here the way it would, say, in New York City or London. So I really appreciate that as well here. So, music and dance culture in Georgia, I really like. I do find that people here really like music of all sorts. It's amazing how many people here know their folk music in a way in which I don't think you would find anymore in way too many parts of the West. So the next thing that has become very important to me since I've come here is the puppet and theater culture here. And I find that actually Georgia, particularly Tbilisi, turns out to be a better puppet city than Paris, believe it or not. There's more puppetry going on in any specific period. Now, there is the Tbilisi State Puppet Theater, which has regular shows. Most of them are for younger people, although some of them, it doesn't matter what age you are when you watch them. There's also the Gabriadze Marionette Theater, which tends to go in cycles. So it'll be active for a few months, and then they'll go on the road, and then they'll come over. And these are more expensive tickets, and they tend to sell out quickly. But by more expensive, I don't mean, $35. I mean more like between $10, $15 or so, like that. But it's a small theater, and they tend to sell out every seat when they do. But their productions are the highest quality. There's also the Budragana Gagra Theater, which is the one I'm most connected with. They do one show every month, and then they also go off. They've gone off to Berlin and to, I think, Amsterdam, other places, and performed. And they have, they go off into the villages, and I had a chance to go off to a couple of small villages with them last year, and I still haven't put these things online yet for people to see. But here's a little clip that'll give you an idea of their work. They do hand shadow puppets. Not just hand shadow puppets, but sometimes abstract hand shadow puppets. This was a particularly crazy audience of Azeri children, because it was near the border of Azerbaijan. So check this out. And then there's my friends over at the Tbilisi Chamber Theater, Georgi Khazava and his people. And they do both kind of very interesting modern theater, as well as they do puppets. And then there are other theaters which use puppetry. There's the Movement Theater, which uses puppetry as well as electronic music and dance and acrobatics into one melange of things. And the Marjanishvili Theater also uses puppetry. My friend Nino has a separate puppet division, which is not regular, but is regular enough. The best way to find out is to go to the GeorgianTickets.ge website, and then you see what tickets are available. As far as I know, that's the only way to really understand what's coming up here. There's no website that just says what's happening in Georgia. Unfortunately, somebody needs to do that to help tourists figure out where to go while they're here, because it's more than just things you buy tickets for. Then, one thing I knew nothing about before I actually came to Georgia the first time, and have since learned much more about, and sometime I'm going to do a few videos on the subject, is Georgian art. And Georgian art goes back into the Middle Ages with frescoes and ornamentation on the walls of churches and buildings, and goes all the way through to the present. And one of the things that's very interesting about it is, because of their location, they never actually went through the Renaissance. And so there's a whole period from the late Middle Ages all the way into the late, midway to the late 19th century that isn't really a part of their vocabulary, of their grammar in art. The only artist that most people who don't live in Georgia might know, and I say might because even this is a stretch, is Nikos Pyrosmani, who was essentially an itinerant sign painter who painted a very primitive style work. And it was his primitivism that caught the eye of people in the West. The Georgians weren't completely unaware of the developments in art in the Western world. There were people who imitated and learned some of the effects, the trompe-l'oeil, the perspective effects. But there's no art of any real note in that style here. There are a few people you can go, okay, that's from, before the Impressionist period, but it's nothing any art historian would pay any attention to. Once Pirosmani comes, though, you start getting a very interesting thing. You start getting artists who have three connections. One is Pirosmani's primitivism. Secondly, there was a trio of artists, David Kakabadze, Lado Guriashvili, and Elena Akhlidiani, who all went to Paris in the late 19th century, just in time for the post-impressionists to start flattening out everything. So, Gauguin and Cézanne and those people had an effect upon these Georgian artists. They eventually would all come back and start making more Georgian works. But what happened was they connected with the third, so there's that post-impressionist kind of artistic development, and then there was the effect of the old medieval art. And the three of those three poles together, the primitivism, the post-impressionism and beyond, and the old medieval styles, the old church styles, all kind of come together in their work. And you see this all the way through the 20th century. And whenever I see Georgian artists, and it would take me too long, I'll show you a little image here of just some of the books that I have picked up. And I keep finding these books on the street. Many of them were printed during Soviet times, and I will find an old copy of a book. The nice thing about many of these old Soviet books is that the Soviets were trying to prove they did indeed allow art. And while this art isn't the same as what was going on in the West, I actually find it cohesive as a style, and that it all relates back to the same three-part pillar. It all starts to change once Georgian opens up in the 21st century, and then you start to get postmodern art. And once you get the postmodern art, it does what it does everywhere. It kills the art. It's like architecture. It kills it. And creates work which is literally indistinguishable from work anywhere. However, when I look at the work on the street art, or when I look at the work that might be as part of I found a graphic novel of Shota Rustaveli's Knight in Panther Skin. When you look at these kinds of things, you say, there it is again. So it's not that this style is dead, as much as, and this is a problem we'll come to in a moment, people who want to act more Western tend to poo-poo their own Georgian culture, tend to dismiss it as being primitive or something. To which my response to that is, as someone who understands the Western traditions and the developments in art very well, is like, you're out of your mind. That there's nothing to it's what's happening in the postmodern world in art these days is the emperor's new clothes. Your traditions, including all the things that happened in the 20th century, even under the Soviet art, those are the things you need to look at and build from. That's your base culture. This new stuff that you're doing that's based on being cool and Western, just ditch it immediately. And I'll be saying that more when I eventually get around to talking about this stuff. So, also, let's talk about the delicious and the indigestible. Let's talk a little bit about food. Again, I'm going to talk about food a lot more. Of course, I have discovered the absolutely legendary exemplar foods of khachapuri and hinkali. And I particularly like, there's a little dessert called the kada, which I really like. I could eat way too many of those. And then what you find is there are basic Georgian ingredients that show up everywhere. Walnuts is one of them. Pomegranates is another. The eggplant, as we say in America, or aubergine, as they say in other places, is these are staples. I mean, they do more than one thing with these. They make sauces out of walnuts and eggplants, and then of course there's honey goes back into the mists of time here. They say that there's evidence for honey being harvested before Georgia, but Georgia has the actual oldest pieces of pottery and stuff that actually have residue of honey in them, just as they have the oldest wine culture on earth. And I've learned a lot about wine here. There's a thing it's a large piece of pottery called the qvevri. Did I say that right, Georgian friends? I tried to. And I've learned about qvevri wines, and what they are is they have a more, I wouldn't want to say metallic or it's almost like there's a kind of a mineral taste to them that's very different than the usual wooden cask wines. They do make those here as well. And what's happened is since the opening up of Georgia in the 21st century, there's a lot more wine culture here now. Many wine bars, many wines to sample, and it's all Georgian. You know, there are kinds of wines I never saw before, like mitsvane. Mitsvane isn't red, it isn't white. Mitsvane is a word that means green. And I won't go into it, but it's a whole world. At some point, I've got to do some videos on food, but I've been thinking about how to do it. I don't want to do one of these videos where someone sits and goes like, oh, I'm trying this for the first time, blah, 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 because I'm not trying anything for the first time. I want to talk with some intelligence about it, and at the moment, I can't. Also, cheeses. There's a Solguni cheese here that I really like, and I really like the smoked variation on it. There's another variation has honey in the actual fermentation, and that's kind of hit or miss for me. I've had some that's kind of softer, brilliant, because the honey is still inside of it, and then others that are a bit harder, and the honey has kind of, it's still good, but the honey has kind of dribbled out. There's Svan salt, which isn't really salt. It's not like a kind of a salt you mine. It's rather a mixture, a blend of a savory blend that has a lot of salt in it, and you put it on various meats and things like that. There's tarragon soda, which is green. It's obviously a fake green, but nevertheless, tarragon was never something I would associate on the sweet end of the spectrum. It was always something that was more for savory dishes, which it is used for here, but it's also a soda. Like I say, sometime I have to make a complete food video. And then there are odd things that I can find regularly here, like rabbits. I know I can constantly get rabbits if I go to certain places. German sausages, which are really great, and I can find those regularly here. There is, in fact, a butcher shop not very far from me. It's one of the best butcher shops in the city, called Blauenstein, and it was started by a Swiss gentleman, Mr. Blauenstein, who evidently, I think it's more French techniques than German techniques, because everything in there is labeled in Georgian and in French. So, but here's a weird thing before I describe this butcher shop. Everywhere else, the Georgians do not have a culture of butchers. They have a culture of people who cut up meat, but there's a difference between a butcher and someone who cuts up meat. If you go to America, you will see a very detailed chart imposed on the line drawing of the cow of all the different parts of the cow and exactly what cuts of meat come from there. In France, you get something similar. In Germany, you get something similar. there isn't that kind of culture here. I've never walked into a Georgian place selling meat. Notice I didn't call it a butcher shop. And seen a diagram of a cow with different cuts of meat. Georgians tend to just cut big pieces off. Some of them are in regular shapes. If you go to a place like the Agro Hub, which is not far from me, they have a pretty good butcher there. But they will have regular size cuts, but they don't necessarily, I mean, they will cut clean across what we in the West would consider a great cut, like a T-bone steak, which I can get at Blauenstein. So I will get certain kinds of cuts of meat there. I can get pre-made Wiener Schnitzel there in the pork section. I can get pork kidneys there. I can, to make a steak and kidney pie. I can get all sorts of interesting meats. Now, this isn't to say I don't like the way Georgians cut their meat. It's just that, if you're used to the taste of a certain kind of cut of meat, and then you find, oh, well, it's been turned into something else. It's often the meat is put on skewers into kind of a shashlik kind of thing, or it's boiled. And there's some actual, I had the other night at Bachana Halvashi's place. There's this amazing thing. I don't know the name of it, but it's just like ultra boiled down pork in a kind of a barbecue sauce. Just mind-bogglingly good. The reason I'm not talking about the Georgian food that much is because I don't have all the names memorized, and I don't know what's in all the ingredients. And like I said, I don't want to talk just like I like this, I don't like that kind of thing. So there's certain things you can get. There's also a small chain here called Gastronomy. I remember when there was just one of them right at the beginning of the pandemic, and they've since mushroomed into about 5 or 6 of them because they became successful. It's the only place I know where I can get French cheeses, Swiss cheeses, Dutch cheeses, Spanish cheeses, sheep cheese. That place has been really good for me. They've actually had hot sauce, where it's been hard to find hot sauce there. They've had ingredients there. They get generally food, it's all imported food, but that's been a lifesaver because you can't, as much as I like khachapuri and hinkali, if one eats too many of the bready street food, one just gets this bloated feeling. It's good. For instance, if I just went down and bought a medium-size Emiratian khachapuri, I would feel bloated for hours because it's just heavy cheese and kind of oily bread. That's not to say it's not good. It's just to say you can't eat that much of it. Sometimes I've gone to some fairly good restaurants here, ordered a piece of pork or a chicken, and they bring a rock out to me. It's just like, you can't cut into it at all. And I'm sitting there going like, I want to go up into the kitchen and show them how to cook these things. I don't know why that happens, because this is the kind of thing that would immediately be sent back. And I didn't send it back because I'm in Georgia. Evidently, no one complains about that here. Whereas, yeah, we would complain about that quite heavily if the food was cooked too much. But maybe there's a reason for it that I don't understand, like going back into time, because these things aren't as problematic to cook as they used to be. And I can find American foods now, like peanut butter, although there's an awful lot of peanut butter here, although there's not that much peanut butter here, but it has palm oil in it, which, to me, there's only 2 ingredients that should be in peanut butter: peanuts and a bit of salt. After that, you're in trouble. And then someone started something here they started a peanut butter, it was almost pure peanuts, and half of it was the peanut oil. And I'm like, no, that's not how peanuts work. So I bought that once and said, never again. I don't want peanut butter that pours out of a jar. What else? Popcorn. I've finally found some decent popping corn here. You can find popcorn on the streets. It's okay. But I like to pop my own popcorn. And I have requirements because I'm an American. Peanut butter and popcorn are like high in the American list of things that we care about. But I can find some that I can actually buy here. And that makes me feel that when you need that peanut butter, you need that popcorn feel, you can get it. And so there. Okay, enough about food. So let's talk about some of the disappointments of being here. For one thing, I guess I've watched way too many Georgian videos of kids sitting around playing panduris and singing and people dancing and such. It doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to. And one thing I realize is I've arrived here right behind the smartphone. And many of my disappointments here relate to technology. Thus, they would be disappointments anywhere. But it's particularly sad for me here. I have a friend, my friend Alexander, who told me that about 10 years ago, you could go into almost any restaurant and you would hear a group of men singing. And now you don't. And the reason for it is one predominant factor: the smartphone. Alas, I'd like to say the Georgians were smarter than everybody else and figured out how to put the smartphone under control, but they can't any more than anyone else can. So they sit in restaurants and they scroll through their smartphones. It is the effects of technology that have been disappointing for me here. Electronic music. I mentioned this a bit earlier. You just hear it far too many places here as you're walking around. And part of it is, I think that the Georgians were trying to say to themselves, we want to be new, we want to be modern. And they didn't understand that this kind of thing just strips the guts out of the meaning of music. And I say this as someone who studies the history of music. See my other channel, the Anadromist. And that isn't to say that Georgian folk music and such is dead. It's just simply to say it's a lot less prevalent than it used to be, even a few years before I got here. Many of the videos I was watching before I got here were from about 2012, 2013. I got here in 2016. It's now 2022. The insanity of the technological revolution here has pretty much been accomplished. Also, the volume of music at, for instance, street festivals is just insanely loud. Georgians have a tolerance for loud music that is very different from my own. Now, Americans play loud music, but they tend to, I don't know, the difference is here, in America it tends to be at certain places. Here, you're walking through a mall, and it's just the music above you is just like, what are you doing to me? So anyway, I'll leave that there. It's just, it's the kind of thing I just get used to, and I don't want to. I mean, one year there was a Christmas festival that went on 3 weeks that was about 1 kilometer away from me. And I just kept hearing the music in my room at 11:30 at night. It fortunately didn't go on too far beyond midnight, but it was just so loud. and it didn't matter what it was doing to all of the people between me and them, and there were plenty, hundreds and thousands of people living between me and them. But the music was just played so loud that it didn't matter, And I suppose it's a cultural thing because it symbolizes a party, a get-together, a rave, a feast, whatever. And so people are like, okay, we're in this. But 3 weeks straight of that, I was fit to be tied. Fortunately, I don't live in that kind of an area anymore, so I'm happy. And then, okay, here's something I'm going to discuss a lot more later, but I'm just going to mention it very briefly. Another real disappointment to me is the new architecture that's been going up. And it's going up all over the place, around the corner from me here, down the street, over there, back where I used to live, near Rustaveli. And it's all terrible. Literally. Terrifyingly boring, dull, cheap materials. And if we ever have another earthquake the way they had recently in Turkey and Syria, we will be seeing a lot of collapsed buildings. More importantly to me, that a lot of this new building is killing the environment here. Not that there aren't still great parts of town, or that where I live isn't bad. I live in a very great area next to these 2 Axis towers and some other really deadly dull buildings and tall buildings. And I am sure that this architecture hosts many, many problems. I've heard many problems related to it. I'm not going to even start on this now because it is so disappointing to me. But I'm not the only one. And why it's all being okayed, why there is no urban planning whatsoever, why there is no emphasis on beauty or fitting into a neighborhood or an environment, I'm not qualified to talk about that. Certainly not in this particular episode. There is also another disappointment. Having said that, there are a few modern buildings I like, and at some point I'm going to talk about the bad architecture here and the few pieces of contemporary architecture that I think are really good. But it's going to be hard for me to find 5 examples of them. I've got about 3 right now that I can say those are good. And then there's a lot of stuff I'm just like, I'd rather live in a Khrushchevka than live in this stuff. Then I find that there is a naivete about the West. A naivete about the bad things and a naivete about the good things. And people generally do not understand what's going on, for instance, in America. There's just too much cultural distance. There are many people here who want to be, many younger people who want to become like the West. They have no idea what they're asking. You know, there are people here who want to become part of the European community. They don't realize what's going to have to change in order to do that. All the people selling stuff on the streets, gone. All the kind of interesting things in Georgia that make it unique, many of those things will be gone if they join the Euro. Having said that, I'm not in favor of pushing the other direction either, going towards a more Soviet style, post-Soviet, Putinized authoritarian regime as well. And I don't think anybody here is either. However, there are feelings from there, particularly, people will often talk about there's a lot of homophobia here. Well, yeah, but you don't have the, people, I often say, you're looking at one side of an issue here. You're on the downside of a hill saying we want more freedoms for the LGBT community and such. In America, we're looking at these things on a different angle altogether. We're trying to figure out what is a woman. Should you allow your 8-year-old to go on hormone blockers and start to get corrective, affirmative surgery for being a trans individual? And when I explain this to even my most left-leaning friends here, they all immediately go like, oh my God, that's way too much. But they don't realize that this hill goes that direction. So what seems one way here is different on the other side of it. There is a balance that can be found. But at the moment, very few people in Georgia understand what I'm talking about. And if you're from Georgia, you don't quite get what I'm talking about. If you ever want to get in touch with me, I can bring you up to speed really quickly with some actual, visual video examples. I can say, okay, there's this one, this one, this one, this one, and your brain will be blown by the developments that the freedom, yes, but how do you get to a state of balance before the whole thing tips over and goes the other direction, and so that the person who would now be considered normal is then considered, fascist, wrong, something like that? Big question. But I do see here in small form many of the divisions I find in the West, and I don't like that. So those are disappointments. Maybe I have said the wrong thing. Such is life. I just think it's going to get a lot more confusing. And I've met people, for instance, there was this one girl, perfectly lovely young woman, worked in a bookstore. She was also an artist. She spoke English quite well. She went to a Western-style university here, or one of the ones funded by Western interests. She's wanted to be an artist, so she was working at this kind of postmodern art. And I asked her, do you know anything about Georgian traditional art, or even Georgian art from the 20th century, or, Georgian modernism, or anything like that? And she says, no. And I said, you should really learn. Because all she was being taught was deconstruction. All she was being taught was postmodern irony, postmodern social justice politics thrown into art. And the mind reels because the Georgian artistic tradition is so good already. They don't realize you're sitting on the good stuff that nobody knows about. You can do tons of stuff with it that no one's ever seen. Instead, you want to do the dumb stuff that we do. Why? Sorry for going on about this, but it struck me as here's a young Georgian who knows nothing about her own culture. And that's not a good thing. That is what the postmodern mindset does to you. That is what being too much a part of the West will do to you. After a while, you just become a vague citizen of the world trying to work on global issues. And I can understand people who want to keep that away, and I can also understand people who want more to open up. But you can't open up and remain naive about what you're opening up to. And that's all I'll say about that. I have had difficulties being here. And one of my difficulties came in trying to find a place to live, ending up not being able to get a loan because I'm too close to the age, 70, where you can no longer get a loan. Never ran into that problem before. And so then there are the problems of getting my library here. I've talked about these in other places. One of the things I haven't talked too much about is the traffic here. The traffic is a difficulty. And part of it is that Georgia went from being a poor country that didn't have a lot of cars and automobiles around the year 2000 to being a country choking on cars and automobiles. And without the town planning to make it work. And there has been some improvements, so, for instance, on Chavchavadze Avenue. And I saw them ripping up all of Chavchavadze to change the way buses worked and such. Does it mean that the traffic flows any better? No. It does mean the buses get there quicker. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, why didn't you continue the metro on underneath the way it was supposed to work? Such is life. Because that is what is needed. Is the metro actually works super quick, and there needs to be another line that connects here to Sabertalo. And if you look on certain planning maps, they're there. Those lines are there, but they've never built them. So I'm not going to go too far into that. We'll just say, there's air pollution as a result, over congestion. Nevertheless, my life here feels pretty good. I'm just complaining now. Georgians, Bodishi. So, one thing I've learned, and this is more on the humorous side, and I need that after being a bit critical, is that there is a scene in the movie Chinatown. In fact, let me play it for you right now. It's at the end of the movie. There's a big crime that just happens. Jack Nicholson's a detective. He watches the person who is the criminal get away with this horrendous stuff. And then he wants to say or do something about it, and his friends just turn to him and say, it's Chinatown. Let's just watch that.
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
It's Chinatown. Now, in the film it's said with kind of a hopelessness. But here I've learned to say, it's Georgia. With more of a sense of humor. Because I really enjoy living here. But there are so many things I don't understand. Cultural things that have simply just developed as a result of living in a city or something like that. There are all these personal space issues. I've talked about them in other places where, here's one I've just recently noticed. So, there's no personal space when you're in a crowd. There's no personal space when you're on the metro. There's no personal space when you're walking down the street. You never know if you're going to bump into someone. Georgians bump into people all the time. But I'm in a supermarket like Carrefour or AgroHub or Goodwill, and I'm sitting there waiting in line, and someone puts one small object on the little conveyor belt leading to the cash register. And the other people do not put anything down. They will often wait until that person is just about to pay for their food and then put their food down. And I'm sitting there going like, no, just start putting your food down as soon as there's space. Because you want to expedite this. Because we have to wait for you to put your food down, it's the American mentality. But in my mind, I just say, yeah, it's Georgia. Don't get blown out of the water by it. Same with, here's another one. So, we need a lot of hand sanitizer during the COVID. And all of a sudden, all this hand sanitizer shows up. And I hit it, and I smell it, and it's all cha-cha. Which is the Georgian fermented, more intense than vodka-like substance. It's cha-cha in the hand sanitizer. It's just like, it's Georgia. Here's another one. So I go to return a couple of AA batteries. I needed AAA batteries, so I just want to swap them. I've got my receipt. In America, you just put it down, they go, oh, okay, they type it up, they erase something, and then they hand you the other one. Same price, no problem. They ask to see my passport. It takes 5 minutes for them to verify my passport and do it. Not because they're trying to catch me at anything, because they need their passport for endless things that just seem absolutely insane. They need some sort of identification. And I'm just sitting there going, well, it's Georgia. If I ask a friend to come over, I'm really impressed if they get here within an hour of the time they say. Never before, but within an hour afterwards. It's just, that would be impressive to me. Sometimes Georgians say they'll do something, they don't get back to you. There's never going to be too many apologies, especially if they're your friends. And I asked my friend Sandra once, how come Georgians don't apologize if they're late and stuff? And he goes like, you don't need to apologize to friends. And I just like, okay, it's Georgia. I'm not going to try to compare this to the way we do things in America. Yeah, I am feeling at home here. I feel like I am at home now. And one of the ways that's expressed is that I really enjoy talking with Georgians. Georgians are they're very curious. They want to expand into the world. My conversations with them are they're very curious to know. And I think part of this curiosity leads them to swallow way too many myths about the West as it is right now and don't realize what they would be sacrificing to have what they think is cool, which isn't. So I really enjoy the little markets. There's a couple little vegetable stands. I picked the ones, there's a couple down here that I like more than the others. And then after a while you get to start to, they may not speak English at all, but I know enough Georgian now to at least be polite and have, the guy sees me and he goes like, Gamar Joba, it's just like very friendly. It's just like once you start habituating things regularly, you become part of their world in a way I really appreciate. I have a little shop here where I go to buy tea. A couple of women set up this tea. It's not a tea house. It's not a place to drink tea. It's a place to buy loose leaf teas. There is this one French chain, Palais de Thé, which is here, and they have that in Paris as well. I prefer going to this individual little one where these two women have so many different kinds of teas and coffees, and I prefer that kind of a thing. I like going to the bazaars and the bazrobas. The bazaar is the place where you buy lots of different kinds of foods. The bazroba is the place that has lots of different items to sell. Over by the train station, there's the deserter bazaar, and then this huge bazroba attached to it, and different stores in the area. But also there's one in Samgori, and then there's a place to get all sorts of practical hardware stuff in Didube, and all these different kinds of things. I like getting to know the city and getting to know the people more that live here. One thing I really have appreciated doing, I have friends here who are expats who will not take the bus. It's like the bus is considered some sort of like lower form of transit. And part of it is, I think, in America, the bus is you don't take buses unless you're in the city, but even then, you avoid the bus. But here, I find the bus to be sometimes it's overcrowded, but I've gotten to know the bus system so well that I know, okay, that bus will get me there too if I walk 2 blocks when I get off and go that way. What I really love to do is take a bus all the way up to Matatsuminda Park and hike down the mountain. And it's a good hour to get down the mountain. Or I have a whole series of videos on taking a bus all the way to the end of the line, going to Kujori, this little village, and then walking, what did it take me? 4 or 5 hours to walk back. And it's just like, you can't do that in a lot of places. You can't go to New York City, take a bus, and then walk through the woods for 4 hours to get back home. So I'm feeling at home. Not only that, Georgia is starting to seem like the normal world to me, which is, of course, you've gotten to a certain point where you're looking back at America, and I'm seeing America, and I'm going like, oh, we are insane there. There are certain things we consider normal, which just are not normal. You see the provincialism of America. Now, obviously, Georgia has its provincialism. Every country has its provincialism. But if you're living inside of America, it's so big. And American attitudes and such, basically in America, everyone thinks that the entire world is going through the same issues that we're going through in America. I do keep up with what's going on in America quite a bit. In fact, I consider myself even more American now than I used to be, because now I represent America to people here. But when I look back at our political stuff, I just shake my head and just say, guys, can you just stop? Can you stop chewing on each other and try to figure out a way to make sense of the world? Drop some of your more extreme ideas. I don't know if it's going to happen. And so if America goes to hell, I'm in a good place. Georgia's a nice place to be. There's lots of fruit growing on all the trees in the city. I've met some wonderful people who live out in the villages. I think they would hide me if things got really bad and I need to get away or whatever. Georgia feels welcoming to me. Some people say, well, Georgians aren't super friendly the way, say, Americans or Canadians are when you first meet them. Ah, yes, Americans and Canadians, when you first meet them, like, hi, how are you? And stuff. Georgians don't necessarily do that. Sometimes they do. But most of the time, they'll be very kind of into themselves until you click a button and then they open up. In America, it's just the opposite. They start off being friendly, and then you click a button, and they start to fade away. And part of it is that Americans are much more individualistic, which means much more isolated from each other. So, but many of those "it's Georgia" moments have become normal to me. I no longer... the Georgian attitude, for instance, during the pandemic was not one of panic at all. The Georgians would all say, well, the 90s was worse. And they would just go on with life, and they lost family members and stuff. Whereas what I seemed to see and feel coming from America was this glowing hot thing where people were panicking because for the first time in ages, more so than September 11th, their whole, the infrastructure was being changed by this disease. And Americans don't like that. They want things to go on the way they've always gone on. But of course, most Americans think that everything after World War II is normal. And it isn't. That was a bubble between World War II and now has been a bubble. And we're coming out of that bubble in America. And life is going to become, I think, more difficult. Which is, since I live in Georgia now, it doesn't really bother me that much. Life does get difficult. And when I talk to my Georgian friends, they just like, yeah, it does. And it's just like normal. It's just like, yeah, life does. You deal with it. So finally, let's end this up. I've been talking too long. And I'm getting over this residue head cold, so every now and then I may sound like I've got something in my nose, because I do. And you've missed the parts that I've cut out where I'm blowing my nose like crazy. You can be glad for that. What about the future and my plans? Well, I plan on staying here till I die. period. Maybe I won't be allowed to for one reason or another, but as a Georgian friend said to me here, don't worry about it. I have the president is my friend. I'm in Georgia. I'm not worried about it because there's no point in worrying about it. I am more concerned about getting my stuff here, my library, but that's what I have to deal with. That's just my life. I will be working, I think, more with puppets and with theater stuff here. I'm now going to be giving a couple lectures about puppetry in the next couple of weeks or so, and so that's great. I really need to be writing more and get the books that I have written published. So that's high on my list. And I need to slowly learn more Georgian. I've learned I can't do it quickly. You know, I'm 67 years old. At 67, your brain doesn't function like it did at 20. So it's just, that's life. I get way too distracted, especially if I want to continue making YouTube videos, which do help pay the rent, not through Georgian Crossroads, because no one has ever donated through Georgian Crossroads. But you could be the first, link down below. But to continue slowly learning more Georgian, and to, I don't know, I want to invite friends here to visit. I'm planning to invite a group of friends later this year, and I talk about that on my other channel. And of course, meeting new friends. The great thing about living in Georgia is there is an openness to people. And I'm constantly meeting new people and having very interesting conversations, as well as staying in touch with the best of my friends from the past. And I consider myself so fortunate to be here, and I really do love the Georgian people, and I really care about this place. It is a great place to live, and it's full of life. And I've had Georgians say to me, but why are you here? They just think it's something no rational, sane person would do. And I just shake my head and say, you have no idea what's going on in the West. If you did, if you got out of your bubble and went into mine, you'd be saying there, oh yeah, Georgia is great. And it is. And so we'll kind of wrap it up there. So now you know, I would say a bit about why I find Georgia to be such an interesting place. And to me, it's a place, you know, there are different places at different times. This is now. And, you know, maybe in the 60s being in San Francisco would have been an interesting place. And maybe in the 1980s being in Berlin might have been a very interesting place. Maybe, you know, the Czech Republic in the 1990s, going to Prague when it opened up. But I would say Tbilisi's time is now, especially with all the Russians that have flowed in here. I've had fascinating conversations with Russians in the last week, and with Georgians, and with expats, people from other countries who live here. It is a fascinating time to be here. And I think people are beginning to figure that out. And I don't want to start a rush here because it shouldn't get, you know, the more people come, the more expensive it'll get. But a few people should visit. Maybe you'll be one. And remember the concept of the gathering in Georgia. And something to remember and think about for yourself soon. All right. It's time to say farewell and say Nachwamdis and Drobit from Georgia. We will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.